Good evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Brent Manor, and I have the honor this year of being the chair of the committee that organizes the Dorothy L. Thompson Civil Rights Lecture Series. And I just wanted to take a quick moment here to thank a few people and also to tell you a little bit about the series, and then we'll come to tonight's program. I first want to thank the sponsors and the patrons who helped make this lecture series possible. In the program, you'll see the list of people who support the lecture series, lots of different units across campus and individuals both from the university and also from the Manhattan community. And we're very thankful to them for the support that makes events like this possible. I'd also like to thank our distinguished panel, and I'll introduce them here in just a minute, and thank them for coming this evening and sharing their expertise and the experiences they have from their professional careers with us this evening. The Dorothy L. Thompson Civil Rights Lecture Series honors the memory of Dorothy Thompson, who served as Kansas State University's Affirmative Action Director and also as an Associate University Attorney. Dorothy Thompson passed away before I came to Kansas State, but I've so often heard warm praise of her role both as a mentor and also as an advocate for justice. And she was always someone who encouraged a public discussion of difficult political and social issues. The lecture series carries forth this commitment. It provides a serious forum for the discussion of constitutional issues, sometimes from a historical perspective, or tonight from the perspective of when the law hits the road and sort of the practices of the application of the law. And if you were to look over the list of past speakers and topics on the Dorothy L. Thompson website, which is also listed in your program, you'll see that the series has not shied away from some of the most controversial or hottest issues that are at the core of some of the things that create political divisions in the United States. Immigration, affirmative action, racial profiling, the legacy and future of civil rights in the United States, gay marriage, the Patriot Act, detention practices at Guantanamo. It's really things that are in the news and things that are just crucial for us to think about as a thriving democracy. The lecture series then brings experts to our campus to discuss these kinds of issues, and tonight, again, we have a panel that's very familiar with the issue at hand and witnesses how these issues are carried out. The goal of this kind of discussion is not necessarily to fix partisanship or to make everyone agree. That's certainly a bigger task than an evening could perform, but instead to learn about issues and to create a space for civil discussion, whether this discussion creates consensus or further disagreement. So it's in that spirit then that I welcome you tonight to this event, to Cops, Cars, and Traffic Stops, Who's Right? And I'll just very briefly introduce our panelists, and then I'll turn it over to them, and they will inform us. On the far left is Barry Wilkerson, who is the District Attorney for Riley County. Next to him is Larry McRell, who's the Chief Public Defender in the office in Junction City. In the center of our panel is Judge David Stutzman, who is one of the district court judges in the Riley County District Court. Next to him is Professor Michael Kaye from the Washburn University School of Law. And on the far right here is Lieutenant Allan Lytton from the Kansas Highway Patrol. And the moderator for tonight's discussion is Mr. Art Thompson, who's from the Office of Judicial Administration in Topeka. So let's give them a nice warm welcome, and then we'll turn the program over to them.
Thanks. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Well, the way that we're going to do this tonight is we're going to talk about the Fourth Amendment, which I'm sure everybody can quote, about search and seizure. And we're going to take a made-up case, and we're going to walk it through from as far as we can go, from the point of law enforcement making the initial stop to a case going to court. And so what we'll do is I will lead the panel through this discussion. They'll be asking a lot of questions of each other. And after about 50 minutes, we'll take questions. I think there are cards that you can fill out if you have any questions. And, you know, I thought, if you're anything like me, I had to go look up the Fourth Amendment. And so I thought I'd read it, just a couple sentences. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. And of course, we all know that was written in the late 1700s, just about the time my son's car was being built, but they didn't have cars. And so the search and seizure in cars wasn't even part of the process. So let's start tonight, and I'm going to say that these two young people right here are driving down I-70. You're the driver. And you've got two other people in the back seat. You two, you're in the back seat. And so it's nighttime, going about 70 miles an hour, and you spot, law enforcement, you spot them swerve a little bit. And just beforehand, you'd gotten a call that said that somebody had reported seeing a car swerving down the road. And it's a Volvo, and they're driving a Volvo. So you see them swerve. At what point are you going to be interested in pulling them over?
Well, if I have a report of somebody swerving down the highway, I have a citizen report, and it's my job as a law enforcement officer to protect the public. So they could be intoxicated. More than one way, they could be intoxicated with alcohol or with impaired with drugs. And so I will pull the vehicle if I see the violation one time on that situation. The way you've given it, I will pull them over for that.
Okay, one time.
Because they've been called in by somebody else.
Okay.
It's concern from the public.
Okay.
So
nighttime make a difference than daytime?
Nighttime's going to make a difference because that's it depends on what time of day of the night or what time of the night, because anything between 10 p.m. and 2 o'clock in the morning, that's when 75% of your drunks are out on the road. So
okay.
That's going to make a difference, yes.
All right. Okay. So you put on your lights, and you pull behind them, and they pull off. And so then you're gonna go up to the car, and do you go up to the car first, or do you take the license plate and have them radio the license in?
I've already radioed the license in.
Okay. So, and you've got information back
Yes.
already.
Yes.
On what? So you know what this guy's done already, or you know what that car's done already.
I just know the car is not. The only reason why we're running the license plate and telling where the dispatch where we are, so we do not. Something happens to us, they know where we are. Number
Okay.
one. And the other thing is, if that car is stolen, I want to know that before I approach it.
But you don't know much about.
I don't know anything about the people
Okay.
inside. None at all.
Okay. And so would it make any difference if you'd spotted them texting or something like that? It still wouldn't make any.
Well, texting is against the law now, so yeah, that's a.
I know. I don't think anybody here.
Yeah, I doubt it. I know my daughter does it, so I have to get on her. So.
So so you go up to the car. You notice there's 4 people in the car, and you have a passenger who looks. She's leaning over the dash, up to the dash, and you smell maybe a little alcohol as you go up to the window. Okay. So can you get these people to step out? Is that something you can do?
Yes. If I smell an odor of alcohol or any kind of drugs, marijuana, we're trained to smell marijuana, burnt marijuana. What I would do is get the driver out, because as long as if I saw her throwing stuff under the seat, that's an officer safety thing right there.
Okay.
Because he's throwing some weapons underneath the seat or whatever, so I I could get him out of the car and search that area right where she was if I felt like I was threatened. My main thing is I'm going to get the driver out of the car, and I'm going to bring him back to my patrol car and see if I can separate the smell of alcohol.
Okay.
Because sometimes we have a designated driver, and that's great.
Okay.
With a designated driver, I get him back in my patrol car, I don't smell alcohol anymore. If I'm satisfied that it's coming from the car within, I'm finished with this, whatever the stop is
So
for.
you're recruiting officers with good smelling these days?
Yes.
Is that-
Well, you got to have sense of smell and,
all
that.
kinds of things, I
Yeah.
bet.
Yeah.
So do you would ask him for his license before you take him back to the,
I would ask for a driver's license, proof of insurance.
okay? What if,
And I tell the reason why I stopped him also.
okay, all right. And you're telling him he was swerving?
Yeah, I tell him he was going over the white line, fog line. I also would tell him that I had a citizen's report that you were weaving in, over on the fog line and your lane and things like that. Whatever the
Okay.
citizen report said, I would also relay that to them too also.
All right. What if the insurance isn't his name?
Whose name is it?
So he claims it's his uncle. Uncle's got a different name. Is that something? That's something.
Well, when I get the insurance, I'm going to ask him who the car belongs to then if it's not his. If he can't tell me who the car belongs to, which is sometimes the case, they can't give me the name. They'll say, what's my uncle's? I say, what's your uncle's name? And they can't give it to me, then that's a red flag, yes.
Okay.
That's one red flag.
All right. Now, defense attorney. So you're listening to this. What do you hope he's not going to say or do?
Not say anything. I'm hoping that he says nothing.
Nothing. So he says nothing. You got him back in your patrol car, and you say, okay, I want you to tell me where you're going, and I want all of this stuff, and he should say nothing.
If he didn't want to say anything, that's fine. I'm going to get him back in my patrol car. I'm going to run his driver's license. At the time, I'm worried about alcohol right now.
Okay.
I'm worried about an impaired driver on the road.
All right.
That's my job, is to take him off the road.
Okay.
Okay? And if I smell alcohol, I will then do a field sobriety test on him. And I will do that on the side of the road.
Now, while he's saying nothing, I want him to also be polite and respectful.
Tell me how he should be polite. How many questions should he answer? Are there any questions he should answer?
Well, he can produce his insurance and he can produce his driver's license. The information that the officer is looking for is already on the driver's license. So his name, date of birth, and those kinds of personal data are already there. So he's more or less provided the officer what he needs to provide, as long as he's provided that insurance.
I will say this, if I have a different name on the insurance, I'm going to ask him that question, and I expect a response, because it could be a stolen car. Now I'm going to go up. Now I'm probably going to call for backup now, because if I have an intoxicated, or think I have an intoxicated driver, I'm going to go back up the car and run the VIN now.
Okay.
On the VIN number, because I don't know whether that's a stolen car or not. It could be. I've had this happen to me several times where somebody sticks a plate on a similar car, and it's not stolen yet. The plate has not come back stolen yet, but the car, the VIN, was stolen. I mean, that's how we catch these people. We investigate the stop, and that's what I'm going to do here, is investigate the stop further. And so if he can't tell me, he says, I'm not going to tell you. I don't want to say anything to you. That's a red flag for me. He's being evasive, and I'm also going to watch his mannerisms.
What if he's polite, though?
I don't care if he's polite. I mean, I'm worried about, that might be a stolen car. He's not going to tell me it's his uncle's car. Well, all you have to do is say it's his uncle's car. Hey, his name is Chuck whatever, Fiegel or whatever, and that's what it says on the insurance. Hey, I'm happy.
Okay. And you're gonna let him go?
Well, if he has alcohol in his breath, no.
No. Okay.
No, he's not going anywhere.
All right. So we've got a passenger in the car, got a purse, got two people in the back seat, suspicious-looking characters.
Okay.
And so they don't really want to tell you much. And so you go back, so you run the VIN number, you run his name. You can do that.
Right, driver's license.
He's been popped for marijuana possession. Is that a factor?
Could be.
Could be.
That's another fact. That's another flag.
You're just adding them up
It's added
as you go?
Totality of the circumstances.
Okay. And so what are you thinking now?
What am I thinking?
Yeah, what are you thinking? Are you thinking that...
Well, I'm just thinking, if I saw the passenger trying to stick something underneath the seat, maybe there might be some drugs in the vehicle.
Okay, all right,
That's another factor. See, I'm adding them up.
okay.
I don't, and by the way, when you run somebody's license, it's not going to come back automatically that he's had drug possession. I have to run his criminal history.
Ah, and that takes longer?
Yeah, it will take a little longer for him to run, for the dispatcher to run his criminal history.
How long do you have?
As long as well, the courts, it depends on what I'm investigating. If I'm investigating alcohol, I've got my time.
You've got all the time.
I've got a lot of time.
What if you don't have any reason to believe there's alcohol?
If I can't smell anything, I would probably, if I smelled alcohol in the vehicle, a lot of times I will maybe go ahead and do some limited field sobriety, like, I know it's not admissible in court, but the nystagmus. I will do that just for my benefit.
What does that mean?
Nystagmus, to look at their eyes.
Okay, all right, all right.
Okay. Anyway, and then also I might do the alphabet. I might do some real minor little things to satisfy me.
All right.
That he hasn't been drinking. So I'm going to let him sit in my car for a little bit so the alcohol gets away.
Do the alphabet backwards, will you, for us? I'm just kidding. Something like that. You'd
Something
want to
like
say
that.
anything.
Or,
Got some advice.
Okay, now, if he refuses test, and I smell alcohol in his breath, I'm going to take him to jail for that.
What other suspicious behavior would allow you to get the people out of that car and head towards a search? Would they...
Yeah.
Let me just throw some ideas out there. And I'm looking for anybody else that might... So let's say that you're up at the car, you got all four of them inside the car, and you say, where are you going? He says he's going to Manhattan. She says they're going to Topeka. Somebody in the back says, I don't want to go to either one of those places. Is that suspicious behavior to you?
Yes.
That's suspicious behavior. Can you get him out of the car? Would you get him out of the car?
Well, yes, he can get him out of the car. He doesn't have to have a reason. He can ask every single one to get out.
Okay.
He can force them to get out, and he can make them stand outside.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So far, I'm not okay with everything you said, but
Okay, tell me. What is it that he said that you
well, he said he has a lot of time. I don't know how much time he's suggesting that he has in this case, but he doesn't have a lot of time. It was a traffic stop to begin with, and he was detaining them for a traffic stop. I'm not sure whether or not he actually is smelling alcohol. I'm not sure whether or not he's seeing somebody pitch something under the front seat of the car. It's nighttime. I don't know what the lighting conditions are like. I don't know how long he's been working during the day and whether this is the last stop of the day or the beginning of his day. So there are a number of things that I would want to go into with him before I would accept what he has indicated that he's observing and collecting.
Professor, you've read all these weighty subjects. How long does law enforcement have?
They've got an obligation when they stop you to diligently try to get their job done. And I think what Lieutenant Lytton is saying pretty much gives you the flavor of what that is. In other words, if he's there to check out a DUI stop, if this is a legitimate one, then he has a certain amount of time to do that. He probably would have 20 minutes, even a half an hour. The way the judges will determine how long is too long is they'll look at all the facts surrounding what happened. So, for example, if somebody's uncooperative or somebody is, let's say he's got two cars that he's checking out and one driver drives off, and so he has to call someone to hold on to this car while they chase the other one. There are all kinds of things that can happen that can delay him. But basically, once he has completed what he's entitled to do, for example, let's say he's going to give someone a ticket for speeding, then he has to terminate this encounter, and he can't ask them to do anything else after that unless they voluntarily consent to it. So he's got an undetermined amount of time, but he has to use it. He has to make some wise judgments on how to use his time.
Thanks. Yes.
One thing about smelling, you told me I smelled alcohol in the vehicle. So if I smell alcohol in the vehicle, I need to, maybe there's alcohol in the vehicle. It's against the law to drive, even for the passenger to have alcohol and drink while they're driving.
Okay.
Okay, so that's against the law to do that.
Can you look inside the car?
I can look inside the car because I've smelled alcohol.
All right.
Search the car for the alcohol, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, let's just say there wasn't any alcohol. And you've got all of them out, you've talked to them all, and, you know.
None on their breath?
Not on the breath. Well, the back seat. These two people in the back seat, they got it on their breath. And so that's probably what he was smelling. Now, they're all standing out there, and they're getting ready to get back in the car. You said, we're done with this, you know, here's the ticket, and okay, you can leave. And then you start to walk away, and then you do a pirouette. Maybe law enforcement doesn't do that, but you turn quickly and say to them, just to make sure that we get this done, do you mind if I take a look at your car?
Okay, first of all, I've got to have a lot more reasonable suspicion to believe that another crime is being committed in there, and I don't have enough information on this stop to do that. For me, I would not. The reason I would search the car because I smelled alcohol. That would be my reason.
That'd be
right
it.
there. That'd be it.
Okay.
That's why I'm going to search the car. And if I'm looking under the seat and happen to see a bag of marijuana, well, then that's part of my search. Mm-hmm. Okay, I happen to see it. I know what marijuana.
It's got to be in plain sight.
Yeah, I know what marijuana looks like.
Okay, what if you saw the passenger stuffing something into her purse and throwing her purse underneath the seat? I mean, you look, it's not big enough to put alcohol in. Is that a reason to want to search that car?
It'd be hard to see her doing that unless I was standing up by the car.
Okay.
If I was standing up by the car and she's sitting there pushing stuff in the car, first of all, I want to see their hands, and that's an officer safety thing for me. Mm-hmm. So I want to see their hands, and I don't want to be seeing things stuffed underneath the seat. If I see hands underneath the seat, that's not a good thing.
What would be some things suspicious behavior that you'd want to look for, that you've seen in some of the cases?
Some of the cases, those two wouldn't be in the back seat. We need to get them out of there. That's confusing the thing.
Okay. Well, we could pick up a couple. Well, I won't.
Actually,
I won't say.
like those two.
I'm sorry.
They're hitchhikers.
You mean you wouldn't want 4 people sitting in the car?
No, I'm just, he's wanting me to get ask when I'm going to start searching this vehicle for the drugs. And I'm saying there's 4 people back there. I don't, they're not doing anything, so I'm having a hard time with them being in the car.
So you're okay with them being in a car?
Well, they're fine being in the car. I don't care being, but you want me to search the car, and I don't really have a lot of reasons. To me, I don't have enough to start searching for drugs for myself.
All right.
Now, if I smell the marijuana, I smell the alcohol, that's a whole different thing.
Okay.
I don't have to have a reason then. I've got my reason smelling it.
Okay. Let's say that you smell marijuana.
Okay.
And when he rolls down that window, a cloud comes out.
Yeah, and I've had that happen. Yeah. And these people don't think I can smell it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so you're going to give him a ticket for weaving, and then are you going to what's going to happen?
If they roll the window down, there's smoke coming out of the car. We're going to forget about driver's license. I'm going to get the driver out of the car.
Okay.
Immediately. I want him to get back out of I'm going to separate him from the car.
Does that give you reason to search the car?
Yes,
then?
it does. But I'm not probably going to search it with 4 people there. I'm not searching by myself.
Okay, you're calling somebody.
I'm calling somebody for help. Yes.
Okay.
Whatever it takes, but I'm not going to, I'm going to take him out of the car, and I can run him through field sobriety again, because he's probably under influence. I don't care if he's been smoking or not, if he's in that much smoke. Marijuana.
What if you smell marijuana, but there's not a cloud that comes out?
Same thing.
Same thing. So is there a fine line as to when it's clear you would search, and where you think you have some reason, but you don't really know yet?
Yeah, there's times when if I stop this vehicle, they're weaving, and I've got a citizen report, I don't smell alcohol. Depends on how, you're looking at a normal person. When I stop them, I've made lots of stops in my lifetime. You know what behavior of people are when you stop them. You know that they're overly nervous, extremely nervous. There's people that are, everybody's nervous when you get pulled over by the cops. But there's a time when you say, okay, I stopped for this reason, whatever it is, and then you've talked to them for a little bit and you've calmed the nerves down a little bit. And now they're not. But when they're still shaking, hand you a driver's license and it about drops out of their hands, well, that's another red flag.
Okay.
That's one red flag.
Well, could I ask you this?
Yeah.
Is that enough for you to have probable cause to search if you find them extremely nervous?
No, that in itself for me is not.
I'll tell a story about my daughter just last week. She attended the K-State Nebraska football game. She graduated from Washburn Law School in May. She passed the bar exam and was sworn in over in Missouri on September the 24th, I think it was. She got stopped at a sobriety checkpoint. She comes home, she says, "Sorry, Dad, but I got stopped." First thing I was worried about was I was handing them my driver's license and it had McRell on there as the last name. And I was afraid somebody might know you as the public defender. But she said, "You know how I was when I was growing up and somebody tells me to do something very quickly with respect to left and right." And so not only did I have your name on my driver's license, but I couldn't figure out my left from my right without looking at my hand and doing the L sign with the left hand. And she said I was really, really nervous. And of course, you know me, I'm always chewing gum. And I know from law school and studying for the bar exam that gum can be an issue with folks who are trying to mask either the odor of alcohol or something else. She said I was shaking. I didn't really know what to do. He told me to spit my gum out, and I asked him, did he really want me to do that? Because it was on the pavement and they were going to be stopping other folks, so can't I go put the gum in the grass? And about this time, she tells me too, it's really intimidating to get stopped at a checkpoint when you haven't done anything, but you're chewing gum, you've handed a driver's license to him, he wants to know if the address on the driver's license is accurate because it's a Topeka address because she had been living in Topeka going to law school. And she said no, and he wanted to know, well, where do you live? And she stopped and thought, well, this doesn't sound real good either. I'm living in the basement of my parents' house. But at the end of the day, despite all of those, what I might and some might consider red flags in the context of that particular stop, the officer and the other officer that was there that stopped her at that sobriety checkpoint gave her back her driver's license, and then one of the officers suggested, maybe you need some anxiety medication as she walked away. But she walked away relieved. She walked away, but I will...
so people get nervous.
People get nervous, and
Okay.
I don't know that those are all red flags, because...
Well, let me jump ahead a little bit then, because one of the things that has been interesting as I've talked to people is where a police officer, sheriff's officer, highway patrolman will tell somebody they're okay, they give them a ticket, whatever it is, and then they turn back around to them and say, you wouldn't mind if I just took a look in your car, would you?
It's the Columbo turn.
Yeah, the Columbo term, yeah. I would say pirouette, but I'm from Topeka, so,
But again, I got to have more information than just being
So
nervous.
you wouldn't do that,
Not just for being nervous. That's not enough for me to search a car for drugs.
okay?
There's got to be there's other things. I mean, again,
But
are we talking about personal use drugs, or are we talking about suitcases full of drugs here?
Well, you don't know. You don't know.
No, I know, but if they're going to, where are they coming from? I need to know that.
But what you're talking about there, Art, I think, and where I've heard this question and arisen, is that the officer making the stop will complete the driver's license check or whatever, and there's nothing there, there's no particular odor, but there's just a sense that maybe there's something going on, and then the so-called Columbo turn happens when hand back the license and registration, have a nice day, 3 or 4 steps away, count 1, count 2, turn around, 3 or 4 steps back. You don't have to, but would you mind answering a couple questions? And then starts the inquiry perhaps about where you're headed. how long you been on, oh, that's long, how long you been on the road, one thing leading to another to try and the idea is to transform what was a stop for other reasons that had to be concluded because there was no further business to be done, turn it into a voluntary encounter at that point. And then depending on the circumstances, you get the public defender arguing that this was all a pretext, they should have let them go on their way. You get the prosecutor saying that, no, this is entirely correct and it was totally voluntary at that point. Public defender will say about as voluntary as it would be when you have a person with a gun and one of those hats and standing outside your driver's window. And so, you know, that's the back and forth that comes in, and it's very much a matter of the circumstances.
You're the prosecutor.
Yes.
You're okay with that? If law enforcement, maybe not highway patrol, but, you know, one of the local Riley County law enforcement, you know, they're really looking for the bad guys to protect the community.
Yes, and there's really, there's two phases as a prosecutor we're going to look at: that initial stop, the reasonable suspicion. Can the highway patrolman articulate reasons why he made a stop, the initial traffic infraction, other indicators, the smell of marijuana that he's indicated, where they're from, do their, you know, is the story matching up, and then I think we've got into the Columbo turn now where there's a reinitiation of the contact. We're going to, you know, I'm looking for factors that are going to lead me to believe that officers had probable cause then to search the vehicle, if that's ultimately
What kind of questions are okay to ask, that can law enforcement ask? Where are you headed?
Where are you headed? Where are you from? One case, you know, a kid that was present in the car, you know, why aren't you in school? You know, what were you doing in, what were you doing in Denver? And, you know, how long were you there?
So you talk about probable cause, which is all of these questions are headed
Ultimately.
for probable cause. What would be your definition of probable cause? Any?
More likely than not, there's evidence of a crime.
Okay. Any examples?
Well, if he's smelling marijuana, he sees what's been described as, you know, the nervous behavior or what can be furtive behavior, and I think it's got to go a little further than what Mr. McRell's daughter did, but, you know, where there's an attempt to conceal something, you see someone sticking things, you know, items under a seat, in a glove box, looking over their shoulder, being more than just that anxiousness that most people feel when they've had contact.
So somebody in the back seat, maybe we'll have to change from these two here, but somebody in the back seat shoving something in an armrest or something like that, and he observes it, would that be enough? Would that be probable cause?
I think he's getting closer. He certainly has reasonable suspicion, and he's probably in between reasonable suspicion and probable cause.
Okay.
Depends on probable cause for what. Because you've got separate issues here. You've got the officer safety issue that the trooper talked about, and that, when I hear these matters, that's a different matter, and I would tend to offer more latitude for the officer making the stop to deal with something that reasonably is related to officer or trooper safety, because it's at night we're talking about in this scenario. You've got a single trooper, you've got 4 people in a vehicle on the side of a dark road out on I-70 somewhere. It's potentially a very dangerous situation. And so if you see somebody reaching under a seat as you approach, then that may justify doing things other than, you know, when somebody sits there and they've got their hands on the wheel and you've got one person in a car and the officer knows pretty much that he or she has control of the situation. So but that's one side of this. The other is the probable cause for something, either for the stop, if it's alcohol related stop, or something else that may present itself. And So I think the two issues, although they do, nothing can be separated out completely, but they do, in the overlap, I think you analytically can look at them a little differently and maybe allow a little room there to reasonably deal with safety, but not get into issues of saying, well, then that's a reason for an arrest.
So if you were to, you got 4 people, it's dark, you're there by yourself, that could, I would think that would be a big concern of yours. And you have some reason you thought you smelt marijuana, you saw the people in the back seat, looked like they were shoving something underneath the seat. So do you call for backup then?
Every situation is different. It depends on who I have. If I got 4 big guys in there, you know, that's a different situation for me. That's an officer safety thing. If I got 4 big guys in there that can, you know, I'm thinking, okay, now I've got to worry about them.
Can you ask for a drug dog to come with them?
Not unless I have reasonable suspicion.
So you got to have reasonable.
I'm going to have a lot more than information than what you're giving me. Or I'm going to start calling a drug dog.
I just can't get you enough.
Well, the biggest thing is, you know, when you stop somebody, when I stop somebody, all my stops are the same. When I stop somebody, my questions are the same. I stop somebody, I want to see your driver's license, proof, insurance. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed to? This is conversation I have with everybody. I don't care. It's not a drug stop. It's nothing. It doesn't make any difference who I stop.
Well, when are you going to want to search a car? What is it that you see that's going to make you want to?
It depends on from where they're coming from, how they got out there. If I get conflicting stories from these two, I got conflicting stories. The car doesn't belong to him. He doesn't know who the car belongs to. Okay, that's another red flag. A single key in the ignition is a bad sign.
Okay.
Okay, that's just one more sign. I smell air freshener in the car, and that in itself is not. But I'm talking about the totality of the circumstances here.
Okay. So let's just change the scenario a little bit. And let's say you have suspicion. You've done the Columbo. You've got them, at least the driver standing out, and you ask if you could search the car.
First of all, I'm going to do the Columbo, and I'm going to come back and I can ask you a few more questions.
Okay.
That's how I'm going to ask. I'm not going to say, can I search the car? I'm going to say, can I ask you a few more questions?
That's all you want to do.
Do you tell him he's free to go?
Yeah, I'll say, I have a safe trip. That's my spiel. Have a safe trip. I've handed back all the paperwork. Have a safe trip. Turn, take a couple steps, come back and say, you mind if I ask you a few more questions?
But you tell him you're free to go at that
I don't
point
tell them
again?
the free. My thing is no. I don't tell them the free to go. I've never had that problem.
Have you ever thought about telling him that? I mean, they may think they're not free to go.
I just ask them. No, I haven't.
Yeah, we can't hear the professor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. What I've just wondered is this. You know, one of the problems that people face when they're around police, even police who are really as professional as Lieutenant Lytton, is that they don't know what the police can do and what they can't do. They just don't know. And you also don't know who this person is talking to, and if you're out alone on the road, it's bound to make you nervous, right? So let's say he takes your driver's license, looks at it, gives it back to you, and you think you can leave. He says, have a safe trip. In fact, that's in our scenario, without even asking him, have a safe trip. And so now you're relieved, you want to leave. All of a sudden, he turns around and comes back, and he says to you this, he says, do you mind, I'd like to ask a few more questions. Now, how many people sitting in the room here would think you could say, I'd rather not, I just want to get on my way?
That's right.
Good. We have a few people who would say, I want to get on my way. A lot of people, though, don't know and may even be afraid, especially if they're young. So why not ask the officer to say to them, and by the way, you know, you don't have to stick around, but I would like to talk to you. Would that make a difference?
Well, we'll think about that. But I wanted to jump ahead just to cover a few more things before we run out of time. So let's say that you decide you want to take a look inside that car. You think there's probable cause. You know, and I'm not going to. You're you're good. So I'm not going to get you to talk about probable cause. We're just going to say you got it. And no,
If I got probable cause to me is a reason to search the vehicle. I have
without
reasonable-
asking permission.
No, I've got reasonable suspicion to believe a crime's being committed.
Okay.
Okay, probable cause would be like a dog search, a dog sniff, dog sniff. Dog sniffs on the car, hits on the car, that's probable cause for me to search the vehicle.
Okay.
Smelling the marijuana is a probable cause for me to search the vehicle.
What if you want to get the dog there, and you have reason to believe that there may be marijuana in it, but you don't have absolute reason to believe there's marijuana there?
If I'm not 100% positive when I stop somebody, if I'm not 100% positive with when I go through all my stuff, if I'm not 100% positive, I'm not asking anything to search the car or anything. Now, if I smell it, that's a whole different thing. That's reasonable, probable cause for me to search the vehicle. But I'm not going to, I think about people, and be honest with you, I know people are not going to believe this, but when I think about how I'd want to be treated when I'm stopped. And so I wouldn't want somebody to ask me without any reason, say, I want to search your car. I'm going to have a lot of reasons to search that car. And they're totalitarian of the circumstance. Again, there's a lot of things leading up. I'm not just going to say, you look like a bad guy, I'm going to search your car. I'm not doing that. Now, are there guys that do that? I'm pretty sure there are. But they're not being trained by me that way.
Let me go to the prosecutor then. So there may be officers that, like the trooper here, who are really good about this, and there are some that maybe push it a little bit more, and they want to get into that car. I'm just hypothetical. And so you've got to defend them when it comes to, you've got to defend the case. You have to decide whether to take the case, prosecute the case. Where do you fit into this? You've got a good trooper that's made a stop and no concerns. And maybe you've got somebody else who decides, they've done the Columbo. The person has given them information that they think is unclear. There's a single key in the car. There's all the things. And they believe there's a reason for a search. And what are all the things that you want them to go through to make sure that they do search?
Well, we do consider an officer's experience. An officer, like a lieutenant who's got 10, 15 years is going to get more deference, both with the prosecutor and we believe with the court as well. The clues that he can clearly articulate, the reasons, what led him to believe there were drugs in that vehicle, and why I'm saying to myself when I'm looking at his report or when he's talking to me, these are the observations I made based on my experience. I believe that there were narcotics in the vehicle and did a Carroll stop, then that's what, or Carroll search, and we're going to look at experience and all the things he's able to articulate.
So explain what a Carroll search is?
Yeah.
Or do
You better explain it.
well, what he's talking, go ahead.
No.
I'll defer to you on that.
A Carroll stop is if you can search a vehicle without probable cause, or not without a warrant if you've got without a warrant if you've got probable cause. Whereas a house, you don't have that opportunity. But because a vehicle is mobile, and there's a greater chance that evidence will be lost if you have probable cause in an automobile, there's the automobile exception, also known as the Carroll exception.
Comes from a 1920s-ish Supreme Court case, U.S. Supreme Court case, U.S. and Carroll, and it's a much broader exception to the warrant requirement, because if you've got probable cause, the starting point is generally search is going to require a warrant. There are a number of exceptions. One of them is the so-called automobile or Carroll exception, and that is based on the mobility of what you're trying to search. And it doesn't matter really, even if that car is broken down at the side of the road, it is technically mobile. And I think the cases, maybe the professor would know some changes, but I think broadly speaking, even at that point, because it is a vehicle, they are allowed to search on probable cause. Used to be they would require what were called exigent circumstances, meaning something that made it necessary to do it in a hurry, but the mobility of the vehicle is believed to suffice for that. And so they can do that. And I think drug dogs were mentioned earlier, and I think, at least unless there has been a recent change, there was a case a few years ago, again, the U.S. Supreme Court, as long as, even if an officer stops a person for speeding, if there happens to be a drug dog in vicinity and a sniff around the vehicle, exterior can be done before the officer reasonably finishes his or her stop within that time frame, that's permissible.
So the trooper talked about, you've got a certain list of questions you go through.
Yes.
And so that's what the judge was talking about, is when you're done with that certain list of questions, if the dog hasn't made its way around.
Or the dog
Oh,
hasn't-
no.
or
He's
the
talking
dog-
about just a stop. There's case law that I make a stop, and let's say my partner pulls up right behind me, and I'm back there writing a ticket, and he can go up and deploy his dog around that car and
Okay.
sniff the outside of that car. And if the dog indicates on the car, now we have a probable cause search of the vehicle.
Then there's probable cause.
Yeah.
Well, let's say that you get everybody out. You're going to search the car. You get everybody out, and the passenger, she says, "I'd like to take my purse with me." And so, are you going to allow? Is the purse? Can she take her purse with her?
Depends on what you're looking for.
So let's say it's
Looking for
marijuana.
marijuana.
Let's say marijuana.
Well, it's a container, and the issue for probable cause is whether or not there's marijuana in the vehicle. That means in a container in the vehicle. And it seems to me that what will happen is the officer can say, no, you're going to have to leave it there, because it doesn't matter that it belongs to you and the driver is the person who gave us the suspicion. We're going to be able to search, excuse me, everything in that passenger compartment that might be likely to contain what we're looking for, and that would include the purse.
Defense attorney? That sound right to you?
It does sound right to me, actually. I don't have any disagreement with Professor Kaye on that point. I'm still wanting to go back to the Colombo turn, because
Go back.
I'm going to go back to the Colombo turn, because
Would you like some more?
the officer, and one of the reasons why I asked him not to say anything, because once he terminates that stop and he turns to walk away, and then he turns back around, having terminated the stop, and starts re-engaging in a conversation, that becomes a voluntary encounter with that driver. And while he may ask some additional questions, ultimately the question that he wants to ask and of the driver is whether or not I can search the vehicle, because that's the easiest way, is to get consent of the driver to search that vehicle, because he really wants to search the vehicle, and he knows before when he did the traffic stop and he turned to walk away that he didn't have enough to search the vehicle. But if he's going to strike up a conversation and get friendly with the driver, I'm surprised to see the number of folks that actually raised their hand on that, because I've yet to have a client tell me that they said, no, thank you, we're driving away and we're going to leave the trooper along the side of the road. So when I told him I didn't want him to speak, it was trying to make sure that he understands that he doesn't have to engage in a conversation with them, because I also have more than a handful of clients who engaged in that conversation, who voluntarily consented to a search of their vehicle, knowing that there were drugs and contraband in that vehicle, and for some reason believed they had no choice. But when you get to court and you get Mr. Wilkerson in there and you get the highway patrolman in there, they make a compelling case to the court with respect to whether or not they voluntarily consented to the conversation that they had with the highway patrolman at the time that they did the Colombo turn. So I was surprised to see the number of hands that were raised that indicated that they would not stand there, sit there, and carry on a conversation with the highway patrol.
How many of you who raised your hands have had that experience? 2? 4?
So you're disappointed that his clients are...
Extremely disappointed. I mean, you know, one of the things that we are about is helping people clear their conscience. And so the more information that they provide to law enforcement, the quicker we can help them.
Well, let me ask you a general question. Why is this important? Why do we care? Why do we care whether somebody has a right to say, no, you can't search my car? Why is this an important issue for our country? This is a softball.
Well,
Personal liberty.
Personal
I
liberty.
mean, it's personal liberty. I mean, we should be free from unnecessary governmental intrusions.
Okay. Does that sum it up?
Well, you know, I think in this country, as opposed to Canada, for example, we have a long history of concern about intrusion by governmental authorities on our privacy. So the Fourth Amendment is one of those amendments that many of you may know has a very specific history behind it, why we've got it. The reason we've got it is that in colonial times, one of the problems that the British were facing was sedition, that people were writing these newspapers, they were constantly agitating about their dissatisfaction with the government. And one of the things that the British did was they used what was called the writ of assistance. And the writ was given by judges who were very compliant, and it allowed soldiers to search houses for whatever they were looking for without having to be specific or particular about it. They could come to your house, you couldn't stop them, and they could turn it upside down. This was so reprehensible in the eyes of the colonists that the Fourth Amendment was written and definitely accepted by the Continental Congress. And it says, you know, you've got a right to be secure. The government shall know the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated. And then it said, and no warrants shall issue without probable cause, you know, particularly describing the place to be searched and the things or persons to be seized. So they were very clear about what they wanted. So what's happened since then is that the courts and the legislatures have had to face the fact that society has changed. And we have then applied the Fourth Amendment, for example, probable cause requirement to warrantless searches, because the Fourth Amendment doesn't say you've got a right to probable cause before you can be searched without a warrant. So I think in this country we feel very strongly that we do not trust the government to treat us properly unless there is a neutral magistrate between us and them when it comes to a search warrant, and we also believe that warrantless searches should be treated the same way.
Or I might just add to that I think that, you know, we've talked about, and Lieutenant Lytton has talked about a lot of factors. We've talked about factors, add this piece, add this piece. And the reason that those have become so important over time is what Professor Kaye was talking about, is that the starting point is that absent some very good reason, you're allowed to go on your way and do what you're doing. And so you start to look at all the various pieces of information before deciding whether there really was a basis for that intrusion. And any time that a vehicle is stopped, that's a seizure. You have stopped someone from going where they were going, and then you get to the levels of reasonableness. This all started with a report. One of the facts you didn't throw in was whether it was an anonymous report of someone weaving, which would be given less credence as a factor, or whether it was a report where somebody said, you know, my name is so-and-so, and I live at such and such, and I'm driving at this place, and I saw this person do that. Because then you have a citizen who is identifying him or herself and subject to having somebody come back to them and say, well, you turned in a false report. So One has less credibility, one has more. It's all matters of degree. And that's why when you add those, you look at so many factors in each situation because of the care that is put into examining this. And the care is always from the point of view when somebody's trying to throw out evidence saying that the trooper improperly gained evidence, the burden isn't then on the public defender to say, see, this is why it should be thrown out. The burden goes to the prosecutor to prove that the stop was proper and that the evidence was taken appropriately. And so at each step along the way, there are procedural aspects that are designed to play into what the Fourth Amendment historically is about. And things are not going to change, no more than they were with the advent of different kinds of vehicles, but then you get into questions about what about the smartphone that you found in the vehicle, which has a lot of information and a lot of information about that person. And can you look at that when you get into the vehicle when you're legitimately doing a search? What if, and again, you then go into an array of other factors that may or may not lead to that. So the questions don't stop coming because circumstances keep changing, but always the starting point is that it's the role of the government to prove that things have been done in a way that justify tipping the balance of protection in the favor of what has been done versus just randomly interfering with people.
Thank you. Well, what we might do now is if anybody's got any questions that you've written down, you can bring them up or have somebody collect them for you. And I particularly want to thank Lieutenant Lytton here because I feel like I was a little hard on you here. Hopefully you don't feel that way.
Yeah, I'm good. He's a judge.
Is there anything else anybody would like to say during this process? We'll just answer questions, okay?
Can indeed.
Do you know State v. Smith in 2008?
Okay. Oh.
Okay, my goodness gracious.
Probably I read them every week when they come out, so I'll probably run across it at some point.
I just saw it was from 2008. I guess something that's legitimate traffic stop. Not extended by any
Okay.
not observed so that the individual person that is in traffic stop.
Well,
Evidence is suppressed because what the users are squished the purpose of the traffic stop. And they read all the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court cases.
well, there's a bunch here, so bear with me. Jeez. Let's see, we may be here a while. We have 25 minutes. So there are 3 or 4 here about the Arizona immigration law. Of course, we're not in Arizona, but let's talk about asking questions. We're back to you again about, so you stop somebody, do you ask them to see their papers? Was that something you would ask? That's not one of the questions when would you ask somebody about their immigration status, or would you?
Well, there's a lot of things you're going to go through, but we have it coming through our state all the time. Immigration, illegally driving. They're driving vans, and there might be 15 of them in a van. That's a red flag, and you can tell. Ask them if they have any papers, or ask if they have or any identification, and they don't.
But if it's just one person, that's not, as the judge was saying.
Yeah, but I'm going to have a reasonable suspicion. I got to have a reason to stop them.
Okay.
So whatever reason I stopped him, if that guy cannot produce a driver's license to me, then now I'm going to have to investigate a little further because now he may be an illegal citizen, but he doesn't have a driver's license. So now I have an arrestable offense. Okay. And I can take him and have him fingerprinted and find out later on that he's not a citizen of the United States. Okay. So I wouldn't say that you would. That's kind of a broad thing, but that's how you figure that out pretty quickly, just by not having a driver's license. and you can't find one on
Okay.
record. And we have computers now, and those computers can go and you can get a name and date of birth and stick it in the computer and find out if they have a driver's license or not. And so there's ways you can check these things.
So one question, well, I think we may have covered this. When would it be beneficial or detrimental to answer an officer's question? I think we probably answered that.
Well, you know, the real problem, though, about answering questions is this. There was an article really recently written in a popular magazine by some lawyers that said, what do? Do you talk to the police or not? You shouldn't, of course, because their purpose very often, not always, but very often, is to get incriminating information from you. On the other hand, you've got to be pretty darn careful not to talk to them because you'll arouse more suspicion and you may end up being there longer than you need to be. So it's a matter of judgment on your part, just as a lot of what he's been describing is judgment on his part as to what to do. And being polite is probably the best thing you can do under the circumstances.
So one question is, in Wabunsee County, on I-70, there are signs that say, drug stop.
No, don't say drug stop. It'll say
Drug
drug
search.
check lane ahead.
Check lane.
Yeah, check lane ahead.
Check lane.
Not drug check lane?
It'll say check lane ahead, drug dogs in use.
Right.
Right. Yes,
But there never is.
because you can't.
And I'm told that there are, I don't know what law enforcement it is, but there's only one place to pull off. And the only thing you can do is get back on or go to one particular ranch. So there must be law enforcement underneath?
That could be.
Could be, yeah, well. But that's illegal. You can't?
Oh, no. It's illegal to stop. If you're going to have a check lane, you'd have to, if you're going to have a driver's license check lane, for example, you'd have to stop. If you're going to stop all eastbound traffic on I-70, you're going to have to stop every single car and check the driver's license. Now, there's no way we can do that because from one to volume of traffic, that's unsafe. But, you know, like we have check lanes for DUI check lanes, whatever. They could be called a driver's license check lane. You can do those, but you can't have a check lane just for the drugs. You can't say this is a drug check lane. You cannot do that. Right, Judge?
I haven't had that.
No, it's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
City of Indianapolis versus Edmonton.
Either one of you have any comments about that? No?
He's absolutely right. And you know why?
Okay, tell me.
Because it takes general investigation to find drugs. It's not a traffic issue. The idea behind checkpoints, and this is the first state that its Supreme Court authorized check lanes. These check lanes are for safety purposes, really.
Yes.
Getting people off the road who may be drinking too much or may have a problem. And it's easy to find out whether they are or not when you stop them. But searching for possessory offenses is basically more of a criminal investigation. The U.S. Supreme Court considered this a few years ago, and they said this isn't necessary. You can use regular investigation, but a check lane may be they think may be a more efficient way to control traffic, and that you can do, and so that's why they can do it.
Well, how common is it for tags or plates to be run, investigated by an officer without a provocation? I think you talked about that a little bit before.
We can run driver tags anytime we want, and we just run down the highway and just run a tag. And the reason why we do that is there's times that, you know, the stolen vehicles, it might be expired. There's times when they don't put the sticker on their tag, you know, the right sticker. And the reason why I'm going to run that tag is they may have paid their taxes, they just didn't put the sticker on there yet. So I know that for a fact it's you know, it's current, and I'm going to probably stop them and say, hey, you need to put your sticker on your car. I'm not going to write them a ticket, but I'm going to tell them that, hey, you need to get your sticker on there, make it stop. But I mean, officers run tags all the time for various reasons. I mean, and you know, you got to have a reason to stop somebody. Just because of a tag doesn't mean you can stop them. If there's something wrong with that tag, then you can.
And again, you're on a spectrum. You're
Yeah.
talking about a very unintrusive sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
public information. The tag is out there for identification purposes. The officer may find that the tag didn't match the car,
Exactly.
and that's a violation. And so, but that's way off on the low end of the invasory sort of scale.
What is a Terry Pat? Several people asked what a Terry Pat is.
To tell you
Pardon?
that. I can tell you.
Professor Kaye wants to talk.
Yeah.
I think you said you'd love to tell us that.
Well, I would, because it's very, very clearly defined. It's called a frisk, and it comes from what's called stop and frisk from Terry versus Ohio, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case from the early 1960s. What it means is this. First of all, an officer who has stopped somebody because they believe criminal activity is afoot. In other words, they have what's called reasonable suspicion, which you could translate as possible cause, not probable cause. They make a stop. Now they have to also have a reasonable belief that the person who they are talking to or who is near them, could be a friend of somebody, is armed, presently armed, and dangerous. And if they can explain that adequately, if they can justify that by something the person is doing, they are entitled to pat down the outside of their clothing only to see if they have a weapon. So what it really means is that if you make a felony stop, if you think the person might be a robber or a burglar, then you're just about automatically entitled to frisk them, because those are the type of crimes that frequently people are armed and dangerous. And in the Terry case, in broad daylight, they saw three men walking back and forth in front of a jewelry store in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. And what they did was, the officer was watching them, thought they were about to stick the place up, that they were casing it. So he walked right up to him and he said, "Hold it, what's your names?" When they mumbled, he spun Terry around, put his hands on him, felt what he could tell was a gun, pushed them both inside a store, all three of them, and took the coats, searched them, and arrested them. So that's what a Terry pat-down is. You cannot put their hands inside your clothing or pockets.
So,
And then, by the way, of course, that leads, I'm on the spectrum and factors thing tonight, I guess, but again, none of that is absolutely clear, because then you will get the officer who did a justified pat-down, and, well, this felt like a weapon. What did it feel like? Well, not entirely specific. Well, what kind of weapon did it feel like? And so you have the obvious from, I patted down and I felt a gun, which is fairly identifiable, to, well, there was just something that was irregular in the pocket and I couldn't tell what it was. And so again, nothing, well, I won't say nothing, few things are absolutely 100% clear. There's always some gradation along the way that makes it just not entirely clear, and which is why it becomes a case.
one of the things that that was hinted at and then several people ask about is profiling. And there's been a lot over time about profiling. And so is now profiling illegal?
No.
No?
No, profiling is not illegal.
Okay. Well, can you be a little bit more
Well, because
explicit?
I'm answering all the questions, but no,
You have
profiling is not illegal. It's not something that a lot of people have a great deal of respect for, but it works like this. Police departments often have profiles. The way they develop these profiles is their experience with criminal activity in particular groups that are involved in it. You heard some of what Lieutenant Lytton was saying. Some of the things that he was saying sounded like things that he called red flags. Now, sometimes that's something that tells you, oh, yes, that's clearly a cue that there's criminal activity. But sometimes he can accumulate a bunch of them and decide that this is indicative of criminal activity. Now, the problem is when it seems to be associated with certain groups of people. If he sees 15 people who are all Caucasian, all gray-haired, all over 60 in a van coming back, and they stop, he probably thinks they're coming from church when he stops them. But if he sees a bunch of Latinos who are young and look kind of dirty in there, he might have other thoughts. A lot of the times, officers will frankly admit that sometimes they use what they consider to be a profile. In other words, general characteristics of a group associated with criminal activity. The main concern, though, is that they will only act on the profile and not on other facts that would indicate that there's a crime. And that's all comes again from the Terry case, which talked about having reasonable suspicion based on the facts at hand. So what judges will tell you if you end up in court and someone raises the issue, you know, I was profiled by this officer, they'd want to know. They may never find out what the actual profile is, but they may get a concession that, yes, they do use a profile, but they used other facts also. So the idea here is that all stops and searches and arrests should be based on probable cause that arises from the facts at hand, looked at in light of the experience of the investigating officer.
And in the end, the decision's going to be made on those facts, the facts of that particular situation, the facts of the individual or individuals involved, and it will rise and fall on those facts. And, you know, part of this comes in too, and I don't think it's been mentioned, but there are cases come up where there are pretexts for stops. And there's nothing wrong with an officer making a stop on a pretext. An officer may see someone leave Aggieville at 1:30 in the morning from one of the bars, and then watch that car go to the corner, car makes the turn, doesn't signal. Officer has right to pull over that car for making a turn without a signal, or has a headlight out or a tail light out or whatever the case may be. Where it goes from there is controlled by the circumstances. Now, the fact that the officer in his or her head thought, this person's leaving a bar in Aggieville at 1:30 in the morning, I have my thoughts that there may be something more going on than not signaling at the corner. That's legally irrelevant at that point. But what happens thereafter has to depend upon the facts, because if it turns out when the stop is made that that person had no smell of alcohol, no real indications that there's a sobriety problem or a danger problem, then it becomes simply, do you write a ticket for the not signaling a turn or not, and let them go on their way. But the reason for the stop can be under a pretext, and that's permissible.
Any comments?
I want to get Professor Kaye. We talked about profiling to some degree is allowable, but if it crosses a line into where you're just profiling based on race, that is not legal.
Of course. In other words, right. But I mean, the point is that profiling does occur. It's not prohibited. It may not be something that we respect, but it can be part of a legitimate stop or based on suspicion.
So if somebody's stopped, searched, and nothing's found, I'm sure a lot of your clients, is there any grounds for recourse for somebody like that? Is there anything they can do if they feel they're angry for being stopped and searched? No.
No.
Okay. Well, that's simple.
That's
Well,
that's a tough sell. I mean, you could try to do something under, I guess, Title 42 or something if you wanted to suggest that your civil rights have somehow been violated, and it's, you know, but that's a tough sell to make.
So there's several questions here about what officers will see as being serious or maybe not so serious. Judge Stutzman, you talked about but turning without a light on, underage drinking. Just when you stop somebody, you're looking at a lot of different variables that go through your mind as to what's serious and what's not so serious.
I mean, every law has consequence. Every law is there for a reason. That's the safety of the motoring public. I mean, that's what we're identifying here as car stops. And so any law to me is serious. Now, whether we take action with a citation or a warning is up to the individual officer. I don't know what they're asking there. If they're asking just what we think is more serious than others or whatever, I don't know.
Several of these questions say that if an officer wants to search your car, they're going to find a reason to do it and do it.
But that's not, well, I'm not going to say that there's people out there that hasn't done that before. But I can tell you for sure that I haven't, and like I said, I always err on the side of caution. If I'm going to ask for a search of the vehicle, I'm going to make darn sure that I have all my ducks in a row, and I have a reasonable suspicion that there is a crime being committed. That's just how I do things.
What if it's an RV? Does an RV make any difference? Does an RV come any closer to a home than a car?
As long as it's got
Four wheels.
It's got wheels and a motor.
And it runs, it's okay.
Yeah, it's still a Carroll stop.
Still a car. Even if
So,
you're broken down and not able to go.
Well,
If somebody's
on blocks.
at
Up on blocks.
Tuttle Creek with an RV and they've been there a month, that's still a vehicle.
Where are they now?
Tuttle Creek, one of the reservoirs.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court had to deal with that. If you've got a camper or some kind of a recreational vehicle and you go camping, and had you wanted to leave your campsite, all you'd have to do is get in, turn the key and leave. Maybe you've got a few things stuck out there, but it's still mobile. The U.S. Supreme Court decided, I think unwisely, that the same automobile exception, in other words, a lesser interest in privacy in a car and no requirement of a warrant, applies to recreational vehicles. So that is something that a lot of people don't know. I mean, I think that one of the problems with search and seizure law is it's not communicated very well to the public. So you don't know what the officer's rights are and what the officer can't do. That's why people ask these questions. As far as the RV goes, unless it's, when they say on blocks, what they mean is it's not even temporarily not movable. It would take a lot of work to get it going. So your RV is not your castle.
And one of the things that Professor Kaye mentioned there, an expectation of privacy, again, we're back to one of the real foundations that's involved, and that's part of why running a license plate is perfectly permissible no matter what. There has to be a reasonable expectation of privacy that society is willing to recognize objectively as being legitimate. And I think society recognizes that there is no real legitimate expectation of privacy in your license plate number that is out there for all the world to see.
I just might add that Michael McVeigh was stopped by an Oklahoma State trooper for a registration violation, and he had no idea when he stopped him that he had blown up the Federal Memorial Building there in Oklahoma City. So it's one of those things, that's one of those things where he stopped the guy, saw in the back seat, saw some things, and knew that this had happened. He had no idea who he was stopping, and then asked a few questions, and lo and behold, here he has the guy right there. Didn't have any idea, but it was a registration violation, running his tag.
Well, that may be a good place to stop here. Oh, jeez.
Or not.
I haven't even made it through.
The other guy's name, Mike.
Nichols.
Okay.
Terry Nichols.
Yes.
Maybe just one more question or two. We have a reception, and people can hang out and ask a few questions there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good thing.
The ultimate end. We'll get to your question.
Well, there's a lot of questions here. So a lot of questions about due process. And so maybe we should take one more stab at talking about due process. Let's talk about the two of you and talk about due process to hear from both of you. I don't think we talked about it, and you're coming from two different perspectives. What would you say is your perspective on what due process is?
fundamentally fair, as simple as that. And it's not only procedural, but it's substantive too. And I think it's something that we're all familiar with. When you hear due process, it means something to most folks out there. They just don't understand how it actually applies sometimes to them during their daily activities. But is it fundamentally fair? Because so often Mr. Wilkerson has greater resources and funds than I do in the public defender world. And we like to talk about when we get to court that it's a fair fight. And I want it to be a fair fight when we're in court. But it is sometimes difficult to see that when the playing field feels and appears as though it's a little imbalanced. And it's difficult to convince clients who don't have a job, they don't have a phone, they don't have a home, and they have all of those things that you and I and most folks come to have and expect and take for granted. But I want it to be fundamentally fair for the least of those among us, because I think it speaks to the justice system that we have in the United States. And so it doesn't tell me a lot if those that are wealthy are treated fairly, but it tells me more if those who are lesser citizens because of their standing in the community, are we treating them fairly? And that's when I look at due process. Now, of course, I got to turn to the law books and also look at how the courts interpret due process, but it's that I think should be fundamentally fair in the application.
Anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, I guess my thoughts on it are this. I think that we fortunately have been allowed to live in a great country, that we have a lot of liberties, freedoms, and one of those is to be secure in your home, to be secure from being picked up, thrown in a jail, left there without a trial within a certain period of time, speedy trial rights, everything that is kind of encompassed in what we think of as constitutional rights or the Bill of Rights. And due process is kind of a catch-all that says before you lose your rights, before your property's taken away, before your liberty's taken away, before you're arrested, there has to be a compelling state interest, public interest, before we can do that. And I think, whether it's the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment, due process is required, or whether it's incarcerating somebody. There are levels of due process that have to be met, and I think that's what it means to me.
I might add something to that a little bit too, Art. I think that, and all of what Larry and Barry have said is true, and we can go through all the steps of procedural due process, and this law requires you to do this, and this case requires that. In the end, as much as anything, it's the ability to be heard in a timely fashion and completely. Because one of the things that distinguishes our system of jurisprudence from other countries where people don't have the same rights is the lack of ability to be heard in some sort of timely manner. So whether it's you've been thrown in jail and you have a right to have those charges reviewed by a judge within a certain period of time, or whether you have a speedy trial right, or whether you have other issues, really what that comes down to, and what Larry was talking about, and going to court and everybody starting with a fair chance. You can't change the facts that you come to court with. You have to live with what the facts are. But everybody deserves a chance to have the facts heard, and that's the difference. Because if you're in a place where you don't have the opportunity to be heard, those are the places where you hear of people sitting in jail forever, or for what seems like forever, because they don't have any reasonable opportunity to come before somebody to hear their side of the story. Doesn't mean that their side of the story is going to carry the day, but they deserve to have it heard. So that's, I think, as much as anything, a compelling part of due process for me.
Well, thank you very much. And the four of you can continue on down the road.
Have a safe trip.
Drive safe.
We do have some refreshments outside the hall, the entrance where you came in, and I'm going to bring our panelists back there, so please don't distract them in the front. They'll let them get something to drink. Thank you very much for coming.